advocating for yourself. Our ability to advocate for ourselves, while it may not come naturally to me, to you, to maybe some of the listeners, it's a skill because at the end of the day, you do have to be your own best advocate. You can't expect people to do it for you. You got to do it yourself. Yes, working hard is important, but you equally have to learn how to communicate what you're doing and the value it brings to those people.
Hello, welcome everyone to Hello, I'm Bossy. And today we're with someone who has helped more than 2 million people find their voice in the workplace, which is an amazing feat. You're also an Emmy Award-winning journalist. You have quite the life and career span. You're a global communication expert. You're the CEO of Soulcast Media, where you work with a number of different, very high-profile brands like Microsoft, etc. You do it all, it seems like. And we are so happy to then and the best-selling author, I almost missed that, of Smart Not Loud, which talks about our challenges in the workplace with quiet culture, loud culture. So we're so happy to have you here today with us.
Yes, I'm very excited to be here.
I was, so how did the Emmy come about? Just to start with, like the big flashy part of your career.
Yes, I actually have my Emmy Award sitting on my bookshelf right now, so I get to see it every
As
day. And
it
it's
should,
exactly
yes.
it's exactly how you would imagine. It's like the Emmy Award where you have the person holding the globe. Anyways,
Yeah.
so that is an award that you win when you are working in the television industry. So not movies, it's like TV. And
Mhm.
because I started out my career in broadcast journalism, after many years, and I will say many years of hard work, I won that award. And in our industry, that's considered the most prestigious award, really. And I was working at the ABC in San Diego,
Okay.
California at the time, which is where I won the award. And I mean, I have to say, I mean, it's always a team effort, right? It's always a team effort in how we win an award like that. I will say that award in particular was when all of us were covering, so down in San Diego, and all of California, it's very dry. And so we deal with a lot of wildfires out here. And so in one year in particular, there were a lot of wildfires in San Diego, California. And as a team, all of us, we did our best to cover what was going on. And we did such a great job informing and putting the stories together that that's what we won an Emmy Award for. And so I see and I look at it every day and it's great, but I always think about, well, what are the lessons I can take from winning that award and the work that went into it? And how do I teach it to professionals today?
So, what was the impetus for writing your book then? It seems like being in TV seems like such a loud culture sort of place to be. So how did the book come about?
Yeah. So the book came out in 2024. It was published by Penguin Random House. And to tell you the truth, I
Amazing.
never, yes, amazing. I'm really honored to be able to work with such a great publishing team. But to tell you the truth, I never really thought of myself like as a writer or as an author. All I knew was I had this message that I wanted to share with people, and I felt like it would resonate with a particular kind of person. And I'll tell you exactly what I'm talking about. So you kind of alluded to this quiet culture, loud culture. So this book is written for people who I would say you grew up in a quiet culture. If you were taught, be humble, be modest, don't put yourself out there, put your head down and do the work and work hard.
Mhm.
I call these quiet culture traits. And I know you just like raised
Yeah.
your hand. You're
Yeah.
like, yes, that's
But
like me.
I recognize
Yeah,
myself, yeah.
totally. And not surprisingly, that's who I am too. But I make the argument in the book how when you go out into the working world, especially in very westernized, modernized workplaces, what is expected is for you to embody loud culture traits. So, loud culture traits is basically the opposite of quiet culture. It's your ability to put yourself out there, to communicate, to give amazing presentations, to not shy away from talking about yourself. Now, the problem though exists because when you have folks like us who are embodying and who are raised this way, how do you find your voice in the workplace? How do you still show up authentically, right? And so you mentioned this earlier, TV journalism is a very loud culture, and it was hard for me. I struggled so much. So, throughout my career as a journalist, I always joke it ended up being the best masterclass in communications because you learn communications as a journalist. So that after about 10 years, I was like, I need to take all this amazing good stuff and teach it to professionals. And so the book Smart Not Loud is to teach that.
I've read your book. I love it. Someone once called me mousy in my career, which I was like, okay, that's probably not, a great thing to be. And I read your book, and there were so many pieces that like I saw myself in what you were saying. And then I read an article of yours just recently on LinkedIn as well, and you were talking about how people were recently using your book for something kind of new. And that was interesting to me as well. Can you explain that piece too?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And so this book was written for the people that I just talked about. You grew up in a quiet culture and you're now working in a loud culture. And it's kind of like, how do you find the ability to put yourself out there? And so this book at the end of the day is a communications book. That's what I teach. And it's really about how do you communicate your impact? How do you communicate your value? And that's all of it. But recently, especially this year, I've noticed that a lot of corporate companies, they love this message. And they're like, we love being able to like help our quieter people be able to communicate, right? Because, that's valuable. But then recently they were like, well, how do we help get this message to a broader audience? And that's when I was like, well, if we don't call these people like, oh, you grew up in a quiet culture, what else can we call these people? And I was like, they are the hidden talents.
Hmm.
Hidden talents. Hidden talents. And, when I say those words, all of us can instantly think about, I know exactly what that is. Like,
Yeah.
it's the person who's on the quieter side on your team. That might be you, that might be someone you know. They're super hardworking, they're super talented, but they're often hidden because they don't speak up, because they don't put themselves out there. But I make the argument in my talks that these are often the people who do help drive the business. Even though they don't make a fuss, even they don't say anything, they are really the glue to the organization. And I say, if we don't start to elevate and recognize them, what's going to happen? They're going to walk away.
Yeah.
Why? They don't feel appreciated. They feel undervalued. They feel invisible. So this message I feel like has really resonated. And I feel like this is not a message that, should stay within like us. I really think this is something that all of us should be thinking about, especially as we think about work and the future.
Yeah. Whenever I'm talking to people on this podcast and I'm like, I am an introvert, I like my books, and writing, as compared to normally doing this sort of thing. And the podcast came about from my daughter being called Bossy by her teacher. She is loud culture, I guess you would say. And I kind of nurtured that in her because I find so many of those traits like I wanted to have, So I'm like, well, you have them. Let's like nurture them and encourage them in like an appropriate way. But for women who feel like they are this quiet culture and they're overlooked because they're not the loudest in the room, like my daughter, what do you say to those women?
It reminds me of a chapter in my book, and this chapter is called Advocating for Yourself. And I remember, so I grew up in a pretty traditional conservative household where my parents immigrated to the US for what we consider is like the American dream, right? They didn't come from much, but they came here and they hoped, if they worked hard, they put their heads down, that they would give us, their children, a better future,
Right.
right? But as a result of that, never once were they ever like, Jessica, you gotta advocate for yourself. Or Jessica, you have to communicate. Or Jessica, you have to raise your hand and share your ideas. It was never like that. And I remember when I started working as a journalist, because that was my career, I remember feeling so stuck and confused because I was like, I'm working so darn hard here, but I feel like my work is not being appreciated.
Right.
And actually, my colleague, who is working, let's say, equally as hard as me, why is he or she getting all the recognition? Why
Yeah.
are they getting the opportunities, right? And I felt like this imbalance. And then I started realizing that, the our ability to advocate for ourselves, while it may not come naturally to me, to you, to maybe some of the listeners, it's a skill. And if you learn the skill, it becomes much easier. And so if you want, we can dive into, the framework that I have, but I believe for us quiet culture people, us hidden talent people, knowing what to do and knowing how to say it is very important because at the end of the day, you do have to be your own best advocate. You can't expect people to do it for you. You got to do it yourself.
Hmm. Is there a time when staying quiet is a good thing? We think of staying quiet from fear. Um, but does the loud culture also have to learn, how to quiet themselves a little bit sometimes?
So you mentioned like fear, right? And I think it's important for us to differentiate that there's actually different kinds of fear. There's a kind of fear that protects us, right? It's like, oh my God, I do not want to run into the middle of the street because that's probably not a good thing, right? So that's fear that protects us. But there's also fear that keeps us stuck. And that fear is rooted in anxiousness, in the uncertainty, right? And I always say if you are anxious, it's because you're thinking into the future, and that's not even reality at this
Right.
point right now, right? And I think for us smart listeners, we have to understand like, okay, if we are holding ourselves back, is it because we're trying to protect ourselves, or is it because we are just feeling utterly stuck, right?
Yeah.
And if it's stuck, then you kind of think about, well, what are little things that we can do today, right? Little things we can do today to feel more unstuck. It might not be 0 to 100, but there are little things we can do, whether it's educating ourselves, whether it's reading up on something, whether it's talking to somebody, whether it's just doing the research, right? I think
Mhm.
little by little, like we have to give ourselves credit too, right? Like
Yeah.
these are the things that can help us. And
Right.
so, to your initial question of, is it ever good to be quiet? Yes, absolutely. And I think that's what makes us, and I say us because I'm an introvert too, I think
Mhm.
that's what makes us so powerful. I talk about in the book how I don't believe people like us, we need to change who we are. It's not about changing who we are, it's about expanding the skills that we have so we become a more well-rounded person.
Yeah. I think that's a great differentiation, I think, to make about fear. And also, I will always be an introvert, but I do work on, I read a great, book about the Stoics and how they, like immersed themselves and did things to challenge themselves. So I do believe we have to do, those pieces as well. Um, and you talk openly even now about growing up in a quiet culture. I did as well. How did those early lessons shape you as the communicator and leader that you became?
Mm. The word that I think about is empathy. I remember because I struggled so much with speaking up, feeling confident about myself. I'm a reader too, and I used to devour all the communication books that are out there. So if you say it, I probably read it, right? And
Yeah.
I think it's because like I mean, I really care about self and professional development, and so for me, I think reading is a huge part. But there was one thing that I felt like I was always missing when I was reading these kinds of communications books. A lot of times, the people who are writing these communication books are people who are already very well spoken, very extroverted, men. Let's just say
Right.
that, right?
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, right? But I felt like I could never find a communication book written by somebody who understands the more internal struggle, the internal struggle of that moment where you are in a meeting, right? And you want to say something, but there's a dialogue in your head, right? And like this is all very internal, it's very quiet, right? So it's like I felt like there was never a book that I felt like I was like, I can see myself in this.
Hmm.
And so that's why I wrote the book. And, to your point, I think the word is empathy because when we now work with people, and because that's the work we do now, we work with people on communications and how to develop that presence and, all that stuff. I work with a lot of people who grew up in the quiet culture who now want to build their visibility, all that stuff. And I get it. And I think a lot of it comes down to really understanding what's the root of it. And I think unless you have experienced yourself, it's really hard to have that conversation with somebody. But I
Yeah.
feel like that's something that I can give in that sense.
Yeah. And I think women raised with humility and deference, feel that more. What's one tip that you have to kind of get them started on making these initial, I don't even want to say adjustments, it doesn't sound human, but these steps to knowing themselves, like recognizing that they are having that struggle and then moving forward.
So I think it takes a lot of introspection as well. And I think, for a lot of your listeners, that probably comes very easily too, because,
Yeah.
they might also be like, I am pretty introspective. So I think if we're thinking about, let's say, communications, right? Because that's kind of like what we're talking about here. Like I want you all to like visualize like when does it feel hardest for you to communicate your ideas, right? And you know what? In some situations and in some circumstances, it actually might be easy. Like for example, when we're talking to our girlfriends or family, like it's super fun, like it's easy,
Yeah.
right? But why does it feel so different sometimes when you're talking to X person or Y person, right? So then it goes back down to, okay, is it because of power dynamics, right? So I grew up in a very like traditional Asian culture where it was always about respect to your elders, for example.
Mhm.
And I remember when I first started working, I always assumed if my manager tells me to do something, the only thing I can say is yes, because that was being deferential, right?
Yeah.
That's how I show respect to him or her. But then you quickly realize, well, if that is the power dynamics that's keeping me stuck, what's another way I can see this, right? What's another way I can visualize this? And that's when I realized, wait, my manager doesn't necessarily expect me to only say yes. They hired me for my point of view. They hired me because I can add value. And adding
Yeah.
value isn't just saying yes, right?
Right.
So, what I'm giving, this is an example, but it's just to show that a lot of this is actually just reframing, like reframing how we think about things so that instead of feeling stuck, you now know how to rethink about it so you can confidently communicate.
Hmm. You also teach about strategic visibility. Um, and so for women who don't want to self-promote loudly or who can't do that yet, what does visibility like look like? How can you do that and still stay, realize that you are, a quieter person?
It's hard, right? It's hard when building visibility isn't something that you were taught. Like, for example, I remember growing up, if I won like an award or something like because of a class I was taking, my parents would always be like, well, don't boast about it or don't talk about it because people don't like that, right?
Yeah.
Jessica, you got to stay humble, right? And in some cases, I mean, it is true. At the end of the day, we don't love it when people are like, oh, look at me, look at me. But I do believe it is important for all of us to learn how to talk about our achievements with tact.
That's
And
good to know.
one of the things that I teach, and I'll just share it right now, is like, when you do talk about your accomplishments, like what's something that you can share with people that's like a lesson you learned in gaining that achievement? So really think about that. Like you achieved this thing, but what are some lessons you learned in gaining or getting that award?
Hmm.
That is actually the meat of it. When you impart that knowledge, that lesson to other people, it won't seem like, oh, look at Jessica. She's just talking about this award. It's like, oh, wow, Jessica, like she shared what it was like to do this project, which got that award. So it's kind of like a win-win. I'm talking about the award, but I'm talking about the lessons. And the lessons is really what people will appreciate in
Yeah.
you communicating that.
Um, this is maybe a selfish question to ask, but you developed actionable frameworks like the 4A
Yes.
sequence, I believe, to help people speak up. If someone freezes in a meeting, where should they start?
I love your questions because this is all like the golden nuggets, is that's what I call them. These are the golden nuggets that are in the book because, and that's the thing about communications, right? Like I feel like to really help people become better communicators, which is what I'm passionate about, like we really have to get tactical. And so this book is really about all the communication tips. And by the way, all the communication scenarios we might find ourselves in, but it's kind of
Mhm.
like, what do I do?
Yeah.
And I tell people what to do by literally laying it out there. So you talked about the 4A sequence. And so to give context to this is imagine you are in a meeting and you want to say something, but you're like second guessing yourself. You're in your head, like, should I say it? Should I not say it? And guess what? You don't say it, the meeting ends and you never said a thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, have you ever been in a situation like
Oh
that?
my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. And,
It's so
or
disappointing. You're so disappointed in yourself afterwards. Yeah.
right. Or worse yet, you're like, wait, I wanted to say that, but this other person said it, right? And
Yeah.
then they got the credit. And you're like, darn, right? It was like my missed opportunity.
Yeah.
So, number one, I never want people to have that kind of experience because when you are in a meeting, it's an opportunity. And every meeting is an opportunity for you to show face, to build visibility. Okay, so what's the 4A? So if you are in a meeting and you're like, okay, this meeting, high stakes, there are senior leaders in this meeting. I really need to make an impression. I really need to use my voice. When and how do I speak up? 4A's. The first one is A for active listening. The opposite of active listening is passive listening. And passive listening means you're in this meeting to just listen, but you don't have the intention of speaking up or sharing your ideas. Active listening is a mindset, meaning I have this 2 o'clock meeting. I'm definitely going to find a time to say something. Very different mindset when you go into a conversation like that.
Yeah.
So that's the first, active listening. The next thing is acknowledge. So now that you're in this meeting, you're listening, you're finding that time to chime in. The first thing out of your mouth needs to be acknowledging what the person said
Hmm.
right before you. Kathryn, that was such an interesting point you just made, acknowledging. The third A is anchor. Anchoring means repeating one or two things that person said to connect the dots. Kathryn, that was a really interesting point that you made about X, Y, and Z. And that reminded me of what I wanted to say, which is
Yeah.
the fourth A is answer. Then now you give your point. This is a very beautiful sequence, and the 4A is very easy for you to remember because it's a 4A, active listening, acknowledging, anchoring, and answering. And for any of us who might struggle with speaking up, this is the way to seamlessly chime in.
Hmm. I reading your book, and listening to some of your talks, that has been one of the key things, to take away. I thought you have a lot of them. But that's definitely one that I'm so glad that you shared. But you haven't only written this book, you're also, like you said, you were the Emmy award winner, and now you also are a speaker and a teacher to so far 2 million people, which is you're on the right track, right? Like 2 million is like, okay, like this is my calling, probably, I'm pretty good at this. But what what gave you the courage to do all this? Like, you reinvented yourself a few times. What gave you the courage to take those steps to do that?
That's such an interesting. I don't think anyone's ever asked me like, that specific of a question. I just go by what interests me. Like, there's nothing like grand or special about that answer, but like, I just think about what's interesting to me and what's something that I can actually give. And I really think that's the word here. It's like,
Yeah.
what skills do I have that I can give, right? And for me, especially when I left the journalism industry, I was like, well, I do want to do my own thing, but what will I do? What can I do? Right.
Mhm.
And it did come down to communications, right? Um, but I think it's just really understanding like whatever it is that you want to do, right? Are you passionate about it? Like, and I think that's what drives a lot of what I do. I realize that like if I'm not excited about something, I can't necessarily convince other people to be excited about it, right?
Mm.
And that's actually what I teach people too. It's like if you want people to be excited about your idea, your pitch, your proposal, you better talk it up because if
Yeah.
you're not selling it, how are people going to buy into it,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think that it has to come from within. And I think for me, what really drives me, especially for the work that I do now. So, to your point, I also teach at Columbia University. So I teach
Yeah.
students as well, right? So I'm doing all these things, but I think it's because like I see how impactful this work is. I also have two kids that we were just talking about that.
Mhm.
They're 4, they're 1 years old. And obviously, like I want to be a good role model for them too. And I want them to learn good communications, right? Like I'm going to take a lot of like the things that I was taught, which is the hard work, doing good. But then I also am going to be teaching them, well, I have a son and a daughter. I'm going to be teaching both of them like, but it's not just about working hard. Like you have to be able to, talk about your work and do it, tactfully. And also, of course, like, care and work with other people, right? So, I think it's a lot of it's just role modeling as well, but I think that's kind of what drives me.
When when did you realize that communication was like your calling and not just your skill? Like, has it sunk in that like you kind of won the Emmy for like being able to communicate when you talk to people in so many of these, great companies and it's 2 million people? Like, this isn't just something you're good at, like you're good at it. Like, was there a moment you realized that like, wow, I'm pretty like fantastic?
I don't think there was like a moment, or there hasn't been a moment where
Have
I'm like,
have you
oh, I'm,
realized that yet? I guess I should frame it maybe like, has it sunk into you yet how fantastic you are at what you do? Yeah.
I think for me, I just really just try to connect with people. I
Hmm.
think that's just what it is, right? I think like, because I'm in the world of communications, like to me, every time I speak with somebody, every time I do a podcast, every time I teach, whatever it is, I always just think about who am I speaking to, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do you need? Like, what do you need to hear? And I think for me, like that's a success, right?
Hmm.
But I think that's what makes people successful. It's like your ability to connect with people, right? I
Yeah.
think that's what keeps you memorable. That's what differentiates yourself. Like, if I was doing any of this from a self-centered point of
Yeah.
way, it would not resonate, right? And I
No.
think, and this is whether you're in, fashion, tech, medicine, like whatever. I think that is actually what differentiates us. Like it's our ability to connect with people. And I think,
Yeah.
you take that into the work that you do, you'll excel at it for sure.
I feel like so much of that goes back to the empathy part that you talked about, having that way of connecting with people and feeling who they are and what they need, like you said. And do you think coming from like you said, coming from a quiet culture or being a quiet culture person makes you more able to do that perhaps than a loud culture person? I don't know how to say that. I'm like, is that the right
Well,
term?
there's nothing wrong with loud culture, by the
No,
way. Like,
no,
like there's nothing wrong
no.
with
Like
that.
I respect my daughter so much and her skills. And so many of the women I mean, it's called Hello, I'm Bossy, which is not just about being loud
Yeah.
and leading, it's about being mindful and leading and following your voice. Like I consider you bossy being, because you do what you found your calling and you live it. And
Mhm.
that's like a beautiful thing to be able to say you do. Um, but yeah, do you think they're more focused on that sort of like connection piece
Mhm.
or, more in tune to it?
I think struggles and adversity allows us to be more empathetic,
Hmm.
and this is for anything really. And
Right.
then, going back to the communications part, I can empathize with people's struggle with communications because I myself struggled with it, right?
Hmm.
I experienced adversity. I experienced all the feeling invisible, being talked over, literally forgotten, right? And so, like, I think because of that, I can empathize.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think it's not necessarily a quiet culture or loud culture thing. I think
Yeah,
it's just as humans, right? And I think all of us have experienced adversity and struggles in different aspects of our lives. And because of that, it's a gift in many ways because now you can empathize with people who are currently going through something maybe similar to you.
that's a
Yeah.
great way to say it. I think that definitely helps us gather around as a community better when we're able to connect in that way. And when you have gone through that, there's like a phrase, comforting others with the comfort you've received. And unless you've had to go through something, difficult and receive comfort and allow yourself to, can't do that for other people. And one of the things recently I've heard you talk about is a collaboration piece, which I've been thinking about, and how the future of work requires stronger collaboration, communication, the human connection that we were, just talking about. What human skill do you think will matter most in like in the AI driven sort of technology focused world that we're moving into?
Hmm. I wouldn't say there's like one skill that we all must have, but I will say I'm doubling down on communications.
Yeah.
And we all know it's important, but really, like, with AI here, and it's going to only accelerate as the years go on, like, what is AI good at? Like, speed, it helps with processing, it helps us create structures, like, it simplifies things for us. But at the end of the day, and especially when you think about your role in the workplace, how do you differentiate yourself? It's your
Hmm.
ability to talk about this is what I can do,
Right.
right? AI is doing this for me, or it's helping us do this, but I have to be the one to communicate that impact, whether it's
Hmm.
internally or externally, right? Not surprisingly, I feel like recently I've been getting a lot of people asking me about public speaking and presentation training, right? I mean, that's actually kind of like what I started doing. And I'm getting a lot more requests because people want their people. So a lot of times it's managers wanting it for their teams. They're like, I need my team to get better at presentations. Or when they talk to clients, like I need them to get better at talking about our product because that's really what it is, right?
Yeah.
And what I will say about communications is, when you were like, "Oh, Jessica, like you've made it, like you're at like the top of," but I don't feel like that's the case really because I do think communications is a skill that is always going to be something we can improve on. I'm still learning how to be a better communicator every day, right? And I
Mhm.
think there's no such thing as like you've made it to the top of the communications like
Yeah, no,
peak.
that's true. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so the good thing about communications is there's always areas of improvement. I'm always looking to improve as well. But yeah, what's the skill? I really think it's communications and our ability to connect with people like we talked about.
Yeah. I think that is a really great point. I was writing an article about my dad was a physician. He's, 80 now. He's not doing it anymore. Um, and people are talking about, AI replacing doctors and things like that. And I was saying, well, if they can go back to the root of what they were, like hundreds of years ago, where they couldn't even treat people really. It was really their ability to connect with people that made them a doctor. They were giving out herbs that did nothing.
Trust,
Right.
right?
And I was like, if they can go back to that sort of way to bond with people, then like they'll never be replaced because people will always, they can use AI to assist them, but
Hmm.
people will still want that feeling, that connection they get from a doctor. And I think that's really where the communication, like you were saying, comes in. Our ability to communicate is really what connects.
Yeah, the human touch, right? It's
Right.
like
Yeah.
that human. It's funny because like, I feel like it's like truly like you see both, right? You see like, AI helping with like scaling and like all the things we talked about, scale, speed, structure, right? All those things. And that's great. That helps us like get things done fast. But I feel like there's this other big thing where people really want customization. People
Yeah.
want things tailored to them. They want to feel like it's exclusive, it's proprietary, it's unique, right? So you kind of get both, right? So I feel like with this always going to be here, you still need this part. And this is the human part, right? Of our
Right.
ability to be there, be present with people, right? To do all the things that we're talking about. So I feel like that's never going to go away.
Mhm.
I think both are going to rise up together.
Yeah. And with communication, I feel like as women, we always say, oh, women are great communicators, like men are not great communicators, women are great communicators. But then you get in the workplace and it seems like men are the one, men
Mhm.
are doing most of the communicating and women are not. So, what's something that you like? Is there a communication myth women should unlearn? Is that one of them? Like, should we, do we feel like we're great communicators, but then we just freeze up? What? I don't know. Maybe I have two questions that I just combined into one, but which I guess I do. But what is a communication myth women should unlearn, do you think? And then what do you think makes us be great communicators in our private lives, and then at work, we don't
Mhm.
have that same presence?
I think, and obviously we're speaking generally, but I think
Right.
as women, right, like I think we can give and put and how do I say this? There's a lot of pressure we put on ourselves to be perfect, is what I want to say. There's a lot of pressure we put on ourselves to say the right thing, to do the right thing, especially in a work environment, right?
Yeah.
And in many ways, it's true because the stakes are higher, right? Women are basically judged on a much harder, metric than men, right? Like women cannot make a mistake. Otherwise,
Mhm.
like, oh my God, like that's the end, right? And so in many ways, the stakes are higher, right? And therefore, as women, we feel like, oh my gosh, we have to say the right thing, right? But I feel like what I've realized about communications is a lot of times it's not about having all the right answers before you say something. Like a lot of
Mhm.
times there is no such thing as a right answer, right? A lot of times men will just say what's on their mind.
Yeah.
I think what the difference is if there's something that you're not sure about, it's really just being transparent about it. But the key here is when you're in the meeting, let's say, right? And you're like, and it's like male dominated meeting. You're like the only woman in that meeting. You're like, God, how do I get my voice in, right? Just know that a lot of times the other person, they might not really have the answers either, right? And
Mm.
I think it's because we think everybody knows, they might know more than us. They've done more research. We therefore diminish ourselves. And I think as women, that's something that I have to struggle with sometimes where I feel intimidated, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, there's no way I'm going to say something because everybody here is so smart. They're smarter than me. Yes, everyone is smart in their own ways, but it doesn't
Right.
mean you're not smart in your own way too, right? So I think a lot of it is just like that sense of self-belief. There's that conviction behind what you're saying, right? And if you don't know something, just be honest about it. And you can even like talk about it. Just say like, I'm still fleshing this idea, but I do want to share what I think is something we can consider.
Yeah.
So you're literally like bring people along in the process.
I love that way that you even said of tailoring it when we're not 100% certain about what we're saying. Because I feel like oftentimes I'm a kind of brutally honest person, and I would just be like, I don't really know, right? But then you're still diminishing yourself in front of people when you say it that way instead of, the way you said. And one way people automatically are like, well, if you don't know, why are you talking, right? And then the way you said, people are willing to kind of follow you into the thought. So I think that's great. I need to take your course, I think. But what's one of the things you think about for the next generation of women leaders? What do you hope that they have or figure out that you just didn't have at an early age?
Mhm. I alluded to this earlier, but I think it's knowing that we got to work hard, right? Like, I feel like, laziness is like, I'm so scared of laziness.
Yeah,
Like, I would never want my kids to ever be like lazy. So, obviously, the value of hard work, right?
yeah,
But I feel like the other thing is when I look at my kids, I really do want them to know that yes, working hard is important, but you equally have to learn how to communicate what you're doing and the value it brings to those people, right?
hmm,
Not shying away from raising your hand. And I think these are all very valuable skills that, I would want my kids to learn. The other thing, and I actually just did a LinkedIn post about this because I'm very active on LinkedIn. I do
hmm.
all my content is on LinkedIn, so do follow me there. But I was just doing a little project with my son recently, and we were creating these little gift boxes. And I remember like, and as moms, let's be real, you're the one doing the gift boxes for
Right.
the
Yeah.
friends,
No, that
okay?
is
Like
very true. Shout
So
out,
let's see.
applauding everyone who, also gets help, but we end up doing those things. Yeah.
A lot
Well,
of times it's mom,
I
right?
did see this post. I'm like actively following you. So, but yeah.
Yeah, so you know the story. So this is a post where I had my son do a project where we're creating like gift bags for his friends. And I think about how like, okay, a gift bag's a gift bag with a lot of like little toys and things, but it's like, what's one thing that he can do to kind of differentiate this? And so I told him like, I want you to sit down and literally like draw a little picture on each of the cards. Like it doesn't have to be pretty, it doesn't have to be anything like crazy, but I just wanted him to be able to like differentiate between it just being like a generic box that somebody created, right? And like I think about ourselves and the work, like, bringing this back to the working environment, our ability to differentiate ourselves with things like the personal touches, being thoughtful, like I think that's what's really going to set us apart. And so when I think about the future and I think about work, it's really finding these little moments because at the end of the day, that's what work is. It's our relationships, it's our ability to communicate with people. And obviously it's we got to do the work, but I don't talk about that because I know all of us are doing the work. I know all of us are working hard. So I never talk about that. But I do talk about this part, right? Which is differentiating, being thoughtful, and delivering.
I That is great advice for people of any age at any part of their career. Even when I was reading a post about from the CEO of Chanel, and she was talking about just the human touch that she tries to give to people. And that's a way of differentiating, from other CEOs, especially in the luxury business, who might not be that way. So I think that is really great advice. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your framework. Thank you for sharing your heart and for helping so many of us think about how when we step into a room with confidence and we have intelligence and intention, we can really make our voice heard, even if we are on the quieter side. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. This was such a fun conversation. And, if all of you are like, oh gosh, what are the communication tips? I mean, it's really in the book, Smart,
It
Not
is.
Loud.
Yeah, you definitely have to read it. It was and is a game changer, especially for those of us who struggle. You give very actionable tips, and even, today and everything, I feel like you're in the trenches with us when you wrote it. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
not like a talking down book, like,
No.
it's very much like I've been there, and I love that piece of it.
Well,
So thank
thank you
you.
so
Yeah.
much. Yes.
Mhm.
Barnes and
Yeah.
Nobles, anywhere you get your books. And if you all heard it from this podcast, this show, do let me know as well.
Great.
So.
Thank you. Have a great night.